Long before the pyramids of Egypt fell silent, there was another empire, a city of gold that shone across the heart of Africa. They called it Zinj, a kingdom so rich in wisdom and beauty, it was said the sun itself bowed before it. Merchants from Arabia, India, even China once sailed to its shores, and then, one day, it vanished. No war, no disaster, just gone. What happened to the lost kingdom of Zinj? Was it destroyed, or did it choose to disappear? If you love lost civilizations, mysteries, and stories that make you wonder, subscribe now, and let's bring the past back to life. One forgotten empire at a time. In the heart of the African continent, where the sun burns golden against endless plains and deep green forests whisper with ancient voices, there once existed a civilization unlike any other. Long before Europe's castles rose or Asia's great dynasties flourished, a hidden people built cities of stone and gold beside winding rivers and forgotten hills. Their name has faded from the tongues of men, but legend remembers them as the builders of Zinj, the lost city of gold. The story begins not with treasure, but with the land itself. Thousands of years ago, Africa was a mosaic of ecosystems, vast deserts, lush jungles, and fertile valleys carved by the mighty rivers Nile, Niger, and Zambezi. These lands were crossroads of trade and migration, where early societies flourished long before written history. Here, people learned to shape metal, weave cloth, and trade salt and ivory across deserts stretching farther than the eye could see. Among these ancient cultures, somewhere between the East African coast and the Great Lakes, stories began to form. Stories of a shining kingdom hidden deep within the earth or the forest. Arab sailors who traveled the Swahili coast told tales of black kings adorned in gold dust, of markets overflowing with ivory, and precious stones, of a capital city that shimmered beneath the sun like a second sunrise. They called it Zinj, a name that appeared in old Arabic maps and chronicles, often surrounded by question marks. No one could agree where it was. Some said deep in Mozambique, others in the valleys of Zimbabwe, and some even whispered it lay beyond the great desert itself. But all agreed on one thing: it was rich beyond imagination. Archaeologists today believe the myth may have been inspired by several real civilizations: the ancient kingdom of Great Zimbabwe, the kingdom of Mapungubwe, and lost trading ports along the east coast. Each of them, in their own way, shone brightly for centuries before fading into dust. Yet the legend of Zinj grew larger than truth, a symbol of Africa's forgotten brilliance. The people of this mysterious land were not savages, as early European explorers later assumed. They were artisans, engineers, and navigators who understood the rhythm of nature and the secrets of trade. Their cities were built with stones so perfectly carved that they locked together without mortar. Their rulers governed through councils of elders and priest-kings who claimed to speak with the spirits of their ancestors. Gold flowed through their markets like water, and music filled their nights with the sound of drums and flutes. But what made this place truly remarkable was its spirit of connection. From the coast, ships sailed eastward to Arabia and India, carrying gold, iron, and exotic wood. In return, they brought back spices, silk, and ideas. Along these routes, languages blended, religions merged, and knowledge spread. This was Africa not as a dark continent, but as a radiant center of exchange, alive, diverse, and endlessly creative. Over time, the legend of Zinj attracted explorers and fortune-seekers from across the world. Centuries later, when the Portuguese arrived on African shores, they searched relentlessly for the city of gold described in Arab records. They found ruins, artifacts, and whispers, but never the city itself. Was it destroyed by time, swallowed by jungle, or never real at all? No one knew. Yet traces remain. In the red earth of southern Africa lie fragments of pottery painted with patterns resembling waves and suns. In old caves, There are walls marked with drawings of people carrying golden spears and boats with curved sails. These silent witnesses speak of a civilization that once dreamed of eternity. What history books forgot, the earth remembered. For beneath the dust and sand lies the memory of a people who mastered both trade and art, who built in harmony with the land, and who perhaps believed gold was not just wealth, but a divine element, a connection between the sun above and the soil below. Even now, researchers are piecing together the puzzle. Satellite images reveal the faint outlines of ancient walls beneath thick forests. Old manuscripts from Arab and Persian travelers describe a land of shining kings somewhere in the south. The clues align like stars, forming the outline of something grand, something that refuses to be fully erased. The story of the lost city of gold is not merely a tale of treasure. It is a mirror held up to the world, reflecting a truth long ignored, that Africa's history is not one of emptiness, but of forgotten brilliance. It reminds us that civilization did not flow only from north to south, from Greece to Rome, from Europe to Africa, but that once Africa itself was the cradle of kingdoms that lit the world with knowledge, art, and gold. As the sun sets over the savannas and the wind sighs through acacia trees, the echoes of Zinj still whisper across the land. Somewhere, beneath layers of time, the stones of the lost city wait to speak again, waiting for the world to remember. As centuries passed, the mysterious civilization of Zinj blossomed into one of the most dazzling powers on the African continent. From its fertile valleys to its sunlit hills, the kingdom entered what later storytellers would call the Golden Age, a time when wealth, knowledge, and beauty flowed together like rivers converging into one great sea. The people of Zinj had learned to harness the gifts of their land. Beneath the red soil, veins of gold shimmered in abundance, and the people mined it with skill passed down from ancestors. They shaped gold into ornaments so fine that even foreign traders marveled at their craftsmanship. It was said that sunlight would dance on the rooftops of their palaces each morning, turning the entire city into a sea of gold and fire. At the heart of this civilization stood its capital, a city unlike any other. Built with polished stone and laid out in perfect harmony with the stars, Zinj's capital served not only as a seat of power but as a reflection of its people, as deep spirituality. Streets were wide and lined with sculptures of lions and birds, symbols of strength and freedom. The central temple rose in graceful terraces, said to represent the sacred mountain where heaven met earth. Around this sacred city stretched a web of smaller towns and settlements, connected by well-built roads. Caravans moved day and night, carrying gold, iron, and ivory northward, while ships along the coast sailed east toward Arabia and India. The air of the markets was alive with sound, the clink of metal, the laughter of merchants, and the singing of storytellers recounting the deeds of ancient heroes. Women of Zinj played an essential role in the empire's life. They managed trade, owned land, and were celebrated as keepers of wisdom. Songs tell of queens who advised kings, and of craftswomen whose delicate metalwork was prized as far away as Persia. In this golden age, prosperity was not only a matter of wealth, but of balance, a harmony between people, nature, and the unseen forces they revered. Education thrived as well. Elders gathered children under baobab trees to teach them stories, star patterns, and the secrets of the earth. Priests observed the heavens, recording the movement of stars and planets. Some scholars believe these early astronomers could predict the flooding of rivers and the timing of seasons, helping farmers plan their harvests. Religion in Zinj blended earth and sky, the living and the spirit. The people believed that gold carried the energy of the sun, the breath of life itself. To them, mining and shaping gold was not merely labor, but an act of devotion. The more they honored nature, the more nature blessed them in return. Temples were filled with carvings of the sun, crescents and spiral symbols representing time's endless flow. But what made Zinj's golden age truly extraordinary was its openness to the world. Traders from the Swahili coast brought perfumes and glass beads from Arabia, cotton and spices from India, and silk from the Far East. In return, they carried home tales of the shining African kingdom where the walls gleamed and the people wore the color of sunlight. Through these exchanges, ideas flowed. Words from Arabic blended with the local tongue, giving birth to new languages and new forms of expression. Art began to evolve. Pottery became more intricate, music more layered, architecture more daring. Zinj was no longer just a kingdom, it was a beacon of creativity that drew people from distant lands. The rulers of Zinj were known as the Children of the Sun. They governed through councils that valued wisdom over conquest. Peace was maintained not by armies but by alliances and respect for sacred law. It was said that disputes could be settled by a single gesture of the high priest or a judgment spoken beneath the sacred tree. The people believed justice flowed from truth, and truth was a form of light, as golden as the metal that sustained them. Yet, even in prosperity, they remained humble before the mysteries of the world. The elders warned that wealth was a blessing that could turn into temptation. Gold, they said, is the gift of the sun, but stare too long into its light, and you will forget the earth beneath your feet. This wisdom would prove prophetic, for in the shadows beyond Zinj's borders, new powers were rising. Traders who came not for friendship, but for conquest. Explorers who valued maps more than harmony. But for now, in this moment of light, Zinj shone as one of the brightest jewels of human civilization. The city stood proud, its towers reflecting both sunrise and sunset. Children played by the riverbanks, merchants counted their treasures by torchlight, and poets sang of gods who walked among men. For every traveler who came to Zinj, one truth remained. They had entered a realm where myth and reality met, and where the very air seemed touched by gold. Centuries later, only fragments of this splendor would survive. A carved stone here, a shard of pottery there, but in this age, Zinj was alive. It was the heart of Africa's forgotten glory, a place where humanity reached toward the heavens and found, if only for a while, its golden perfection. As the golden banners of Zinj fluttered over its gleaming walls, distant winds began to stir across the seas. These were winds that carried not only the scent of foreign spices and salt, but the presence of strangers, traders, travelers, and dreamers who would forever change the destiny of the city of gold. Far beyond the horizon, the Indian Ocean breathed in steady rhythms, guiding dhows with white sails from Arabia, Persia, and even as far as India. For centuries, these monsoon winds had shaped trade across the East African coast, linking cultures in a vast web of exchange. When the sailors arrived at the ports near Zinj's domain, they found not an isolated kingdom, but a sophisticated power already known for its fairness and prosperity. The merchants came first. From Arabia, they brought incense, fine fabrics, and delicate glass. From India came ivory carvings, beads, and spices that perfumed the air. In return, the people of Zinj offered gold, iron, and leopard skins, treasures the world desired. The port cities became melting pots of languages and beliefs, where Arabic blended with the tongue of Zinj, and new words were born to describe new wonders. But trade was more than an exchange of goods. It was the meeting of worlds. Foreign sailors told tales of lands across the sea, of cities with towers that touched the clouds and temples carved from marble. They spoke of new faiths, of prophets and scriptures, of gods who demanded devotion beyond tribe or clan. The people of Zinj listened with curiosity, for they were seekers of wisdom, not prisoners of pride. Among the earliest visitors were Arab scholars and geographers. Some wrote of a land beyond the deserts of Nubia, rich in gold and ruled by kings who dress in silk. They called it the land of Zinj, Bilad al-Zanj, and described it as a place where civilization had flourished long before many others. To them, the Africans of Zinj were not barbarians, but brothers in trade and faith. With time, small communities of foreign traders settled near the coast. They built mosques beside temples, taught their language to local scribes, and married into Zinj families. The children born from these unions grew up speaking two tongues and knowing two worlds, the spiritual depth of Africa and the vast horizon of Asia. Slowly, the culture of Zinj expanded beyond its own borders, weaving together threads of Africa, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean. One of the most profound changes was the arrival of new ideas about faith. The traders brought stories of one God, of unity and compassion that transcended tribe and bloodline. Though not all accepted this new belief, many saw harmony between its teachings and their own spiritual traditions. The priests of Zinj spoke of the sun as the giver of life. The newcomers spoke of light as the symbol of divine truth. To some, it felt as if two paths were meeting at the same mountain. The influence was not one way. The visitors also carried Zinj's wisdom back home. They told of intricate stone fortresses deep in the African interior, of laws that respected elders and honored women, of music that echoed the rhythm of the earth itself. The fame of Zinj spread through ports and markets until poets in distant cities sang of the Golden Kingdom beneath the southern stars. But not all winds bring blessings. Alongside traders came explorers, and with them ambition. The maps of the Arab world began to mark the name Zinj, not as legend, but as opportunity. To some foreign powers, it was no longer a symbol of friendship, but a source of endless riches waiting to be claimed. The balance between exchange and exploitation was fragile, like a golden thread pulled too tight. Still, within Zinj itself, peace endured. The rulers welcomed guests with open hands and wise hearts. They believed that to close one's doors to strangers was to invite stagnation. Their capital became a living museum of cultures, with towers built in local stone, roofs shaped in Persian style, and markets where the scent of frankincense mingled with roasted grains. The greatest of these rulers, remembered in legend as the sun-born king, dreamed of uniting all peoples under a single law of harmony. He ordered scholars to translate foreign texts and artisans to learn new methods of metalwork and architecture. Under his reign, Zinj built observatories, schools, and new ports that reached farther than ever before. For a moment, the world seemed smaller, and Zinj stood proudly at its center. Yet even as this golden exchange flourished, the seeds of change were being sown. More and more ships arrived, not just traders but envoys of empires hungry for control. The maps they carried grew sharper. The questions they asked became bolder. What was once curiosity began to sound like conquest. The people of Zinj could not yet see the storm beyond the sea. For now, the winds still brought prosperity. The markets still sang with laughter, and the ships still carried friendship. But history was turning its page, and soon the gentle winds of trade would become the harsh gales of competition. As the monsoon faded and the sails disappeared into the horizon, the city stood glowing beneath the sun, unaware that the very connections that had made it great would one day test its strength. The world had found Zinj, and the story of the lost city of gold was no longer only Africa's secret, it was now the world as fascination. The dawn over Zinj broke brighter than ever. The city that had once been only a golden dream was now a thriving empire, stretching across rivers, hills, and coasts. This was the age of expansion, a time when the people of Zinj reached beyond their borders, building, exploring, and innovating as though guided by the very sun they worshipped. By this time, generations had passed since the first traders from foreign lands arrived. The ideas they had shared about architecture, navigation, and governance had taken root and blossomed into something uniquely Zinj. The people of this golden civilization combined their ancient traditions with new knowledge, creating a culture both deeply African and proudly global. The capital city, once a single shining jewel, became the heart of a vast network of towns and provinces. Roads paved with granite linked fertile valleys to bustling ports. Caravans of camels and oxen carried goods across endless savannas, while great ships set sail from the coast, their sails catching the warm monsoon winds. From the deserts of the north to the forests of the south, the name of Zinj was spoken with admiration. The rulers of this age were visionaries. They built schools of astronomy where scholars observed the heavens from tall stone towers. They mapped the stars, learning to guide ships across open seas with remarkable accuracy. Farmers studied the cycles of the moon to plan their crops, while metalworkers developed new techniques to forge tools and weapons stronger than ever before. The people's mastery of metal, stone, and art reached heights that would later astonish archaeologists who uncovered their ruins. One of Zinj's greatest achievements was its architecture. Cities were carefully designed to mirror the natural landscape. Temples aligned with mountain ranges, homes positioned to catch the cooling breezes, and palaces that reflected the sun's path throughout the year. The walls were decorated with intricate carvings of birds, rivers, and spirals, symbols of eternity and harmony. To walk through the capital was to wander through a living poem made of stone. Trade reached its peak. The ports of Zinj became the crossroads of the ancient world. Ships arrived loaded with silk from China, porcelain from Persia, and spices from India. In return, the merchants of Zinj offered gold, iron, and gems. The scent of cinnamon and myrrh filled the air, mingling with the rhythmic sound of drums and flutes. People from distant continents met in its marketplaces: African farmers, Arab sailors, Indian artisans, and European wanderers, all united by the language of trade. This era also saw the birth of written knowledge in Zinj. Scholars began recording their history on parchment and stone tablets. They wrote about their kings, their laws, and their dreams for the future. These records, though few have survived, reveal a civilization that valued wisdom over war and beauty over conquest. In their philosophy, power was not measured by how many lands one could control, but by how well one could preserve harmony among people and nature. The people's spiritual beliefs evolved, too. Influenced by contact with foreign faiths, they began to see divinity not only in the sun and the earth, but also in knowledge and creation. To build a temple, to compose a song, or to forge a perfect tool, all were seen as acts of worship. In this way, the people of Zinj believed they were co-creators with the universe, shaping the world with their hands and their hearts. The expansion of Zinj was not only physical, but also cultural. Artists experimented with new styles. Potters blended African and Arabian motifs. Musicians created melodies inspired by both the drums of the savannah and the strings of distant lands. This blend of cultures gave Zinj its unique voice, one that still echoes faintly in the rhythms of East African music today. Yet, with expansion came new challenges. The empire grew vast, and communication between distant provinces became more difficult. Governors were appointed to maintain order, but some began to act with too much independence. The wealth that once united the people now also attracted jealousy. Border tribes sought tribute, rival cities competed for trade routes. The wise elders warned that gold, the gift of the sun, could warm or burn depending on how it was used. Too much light, they said, can blind even the purest eye. Still, the rulers remained optimistic. They believed Zinj's unity was unbreakable, built on centuries of peace and shared faith. And for a time, they were right. The city continued to shine, its towers glinting like beacons of hope across the land. Foreign visitors wrote about its splendor in awe. One ancient traveler described it as a land where men walk in gold and women speak in songs. This golden peace would not last forever, but during this remarkable age humanity saw one of its finest moments, a civilization that celebrated knowledge, art, and connection rather than conquest. As the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, its reflection turned the city's walls to molten fire. Children played by the river, scholars read beneath lanterns, and priests sang prayers to the stars. The world seemed eternal, and Zinj believed its light would never fade. But history, like the tide, always moves. Beyond the distant hills, dark clouds were beginning to gather. The winds that once brought trade and friendship would soon carry something else: conflict, division, and change. The Age of Expansion was Zinj's greatest triumph, but it also marked the first whisper of decline. Still, in that glorious moment, the City of Gold stood at the height of human achievement, proud, peaceful, and luminous beneath the eternal African sun. The golden sun that had once risen over Zinj now began to dim behind unseen clouds. The empire that had stretched across valleys and coasts stood proud for centuries, but no civilization, no matter how radiant, can escape the turning of time. This was the Age of Shadows, when the City of Gold faced its greatest trials. At first, the signs were subtle. Traders who once came eagerly from the east and north began to arrive less often. The familiar white sails that dotted the coast grew fewer with each passing season. The monsoon winds, which had carried ships faithfully for generations, seemed to change their patterns. The sea, once a road of fortune, became a mirror of uncertainty. Then came the shifting of the earth itself. Crops that had thrived in fertile valleys began to fail. The rains grew unpredictable, flooding one year and vanishing the next. The once green fields turned dusty and dry. Farmers whispered that the gods were displeased, that the balance between sun and soil had been broken. The elders remembered the ancient warning: gold can dazzle, but it cannot feed the hungry. In the capital, the mood changed. The laughter of merchants faded, replaced by anxious silence in the markets. The royal council gathered more frequently, debating how to restore harmony. Some said the kingdom had grown too large, too proud. Others blamed the influence of foreign powers that had brought both wealth and temptation. Meanwhile, distant provinces began to drift away. Local leaders, feeling abandoned by the capital, declared independence. The once efficient roads now carried messengers bearing news of rebellion instead of trade. The very connections that had once united Zinj became fragile threads unraveling in every direction. Outside the borders, new powers were rising. Foreign merchants, no longer content with trade, began to build fortified settlements along the coast. They came with iron tools, strange languages, and an unshakable belief that the gold of Africa belonged to them. Some were explorers seeking knowledge, others were conquerors seeking control. To the people of Zinj, they were both a curiosity and a threat. The kings of this time faced impossible choices. To maintain peace, they signed treaties that limited their influence over the coast. To restore prosperity, they increased taxes on inland farmers, which only deepened unrest. The once harmonious empire, built on wisdom and equality, began to strain under the weight of fear. Nature, too, seemed to turn against them. Locusts came in swarms, devouring what little harvests remained. Rivers changed course, leaving fertile land barren. Some scholars today believe that a long drought, part of a global climate shift, weakened much of eastern and southern Africa during this period. But to the people living through it, the crisis felt more spiritual than scientific. Yet, even in hardship, Zinj did not collapse overnight. The spirit of the people endured. Villages came together to share food, to sing songs of hope, and to remember the old ways of balance. Elders told the young that every shadow is born from light, and where there is darkness the sun will rise again. In the capital, artists continued to carve, poets continued to write, and priests continued to pray beneath the sacred tree. But slowly, one by one, the lights of the great city began to fade. The magnificent palaces that once gleamed like the sun grew quiet. The roads that had once echoed with footsteps of travelers were overgrown with grass. Legends speak of a final ruler, the Queen of the Setting Sun. She is said to have ruled with grace even as the kingdom crumbled around her. Under her reign, the remaining scholars gathered the wisdom of Zinj into scrolls and buried them in sealed chambers to protect their knowledge from time and invasion. Some believe these hidden archives still lie beneath the ruins, waiting to be found. When the last of the trade ships departed and the caravans stopped coming, the City of Gold stood alone beneath the vast African sky. Its towers still shone at sunrise, but the laughter that once filled them had grown silent. The people began to migrate, some to the north, some to the coast, some deeper into the forests, carrying only stories and fragments of their heritage. To outsiders who arrived later, Zinj seemed like a dream turned to dust. They found walls without roofs, streets without voices, temples overtaken by vines. The invaders assumed the city had been abandoned by an uncivilized people, but they were wrong. Zinj had not been abandoned. It had returned to the earth, becoming one with the land that had always sustained it. The fall of Zinj was not a single event, but a long sigh across generations, a reminder that even the brightest flame can fade when it burns too long. Yet, in every story of its decline, there is also resilience. A people who faced the darkness with dignity, who turned loss into legend. As centuries passed, the memory of Zinj became a whisper carried by the wind. Travelers spoke of it in half-remembered tales, calling it the lost city of gold. Its name faded from maps, its records vanished, and its story slipped quietly into myth. But history has a way of remembering what time forgets. For even in the shadow, gold does not lose its shine. And though Zinj was buried beneath the sands of time, its spirit, of creativity, connection, and courage, still glimmers faintly, waiting to be rediscovered. The Age of Shadows was not the end. It was the turning of the tide, a pause between what was lost and what would one day be found again. Centuries passed since the fall of the Kingdom of Zinj, yet its memory lingered like faint music in the heart of Africa. The forests reclaimed the palaces, rivers reshaped the roads, and new tribes rose where the golden towers once stood. But beneath the earth, beneath every layer of dust, stone, and silence, the soul of Zinj was not gone. It waited. The winds of time brought with them new forces, exploration, invention, and ambition. Across distant seas, new empires grew restless. They sought gold, ivory, and the mysterious knowledge of the lands once called Zinj. As the 15th century dawned, strange ships began to appear once again on the eastern horizon, tall wooden vessels with white sails that glimmered under the sun. The people of the coast, descendants of the once great Zinj, called them the strangers of the sea. These newcomers brought shiny tools, woven cloth, and objects made of glass. But they also brought greed, the desire to control rather than to share. At first, the encounters were peaceful. Trade resumed, and local leaders exchanged spices and minerals for iron and weapons. The whispers of old glory returned. Some said that Zinj would rise again. Yet the rhythm of this new age was different. Where the ancients had traded in harmony, the strangers traded in dominance. They built forts instead of temples, ports instead of palaces. The people of the land began to change as well. Generations born under new flags learned new languages, new customs, and new faiths. The songs of the ancestors were slowly replaced by hymns from distant continents. The drums of Zinj, once echoing through the forests, now beat only in secret ceremonies held under the moon. Still, the ancient spirit of innovation did not vanish. The descendants of Zinj adapted to the world's transformation. They became navigators, scholars, and artisans in their own right. In hidden valleys, the techniques of ancient metallurgy were preserved. In coastal towns, storytellers still spoke of the golden city that had once shone brighter than the stars. By the 19th century, the winds of change became storms. Foreign powers divided the continent with ink and greed. Lines were drawn across maps by men who had never seen the lands they claimed. The once united regions of Zinj were split apart, its rivers, mountains, and people assigned to different empires. For the descendants of Zinj, this was a new kind of struggle. They faced not only conquest, but also erasure. Their histories were rewritten, their achievements dismissed as myths. To the colonizers, the ruins of Zinj were simply curiosities, not evidence of a once great civilization. Yet, even in the darkest times, knowledge survived in whispers. Priests and scholars who remembered the old stories taught them to their children. Artisans carved secret symbols of the sun and the lion, emblems of their lost kingdom, into wood, pottery, and jewelry. The flame of Zinj flickered quietly but never went out. Then came the age of discovery, not by foreign explorers, but by the descendants themselves. In the early 20th century, African historians, poets, and thinkers began to look back into their own soil, seeking the truth that had been buried. They uncovered ruins of coral stone cities along the coast, intricate trade routes carved through deserts, and inscriptions written in languages older than empires. Each discovery was a heartbeat of Zinj, echoing back to life. The idea that Africa had been without civilization before the arrival of outsiders began to crumble. The story of Zinj, once dismissed as legend, re-emerged as a testament to African brilliance and resilience. In universities from Nairobi to Lagos, young scholars debated the legacy of their ancestors. Who were the builders of Zinj? How far had their influence spread? What could be learned from their balance of trade, art, and spirituality? The old myths became subjects of modern research. The forgotten empire was finally being remembered. Technological progress, too, reshaped Africa's destiny. Roads and railways cut through lands that had once been isolated. Cities grew where forests had stood. Radios carried voices across great distances, telling stories of pride and identity. The spirit of Zinj, of connection and knowledge, began to flow once again through the continent-Igas veins. But modernization was a double-edged sword. With progress came loss. Ancient languages disappeared. Sacred sites were destroyed in the name of development. The golden thread that connected generations grew thinner. Some elders wept, saying that the world was gaining machines but losing its soul. Yet, in the hearts of the young, there was hope. They dreamed of a future where the wisdom of Zinj could live again, not as ruins, but as a living idea. A new generation of leaders emerged, guided by the belief that Africa's past was not something to be forgotten, but something to be reclaimed. And so, the echoes of Zinj became the heartbeat of a continent in motion. From the sands of the Sahara to the shores of the Indian Ocean, whispers of the lost empire inspired artists, teachers, and dreamers. The age of silence was ending. The age of rediscovery had begun. For even after 1,000 years, the story of Zinj, the city of gold, continued to evolve. It was no longer just a legend told by firelight. It was becoming a symbol of identity, pride, and the eternal truth that no civilization is ever truly lost, only waiting to be remembered. The rediscovery of Zinj marked not an ending, but a new dawn. What had once been whispered by elders beside fires was now spoken in classrooms and museums. The legacy of the ancient city of gold began to shine once again, not in treasure or conquest, but in ideas, culture, and the unbreakable strength of memory. For centuries, the world had looked at Africa through a narrow lens, as a continent waiting to be discovered, rather than as one that had already discovered itself long ago. But the revival of Zinj's story began to challenge that illusion. Archaeologists, historians, and storytellers from every corner of the continent joined hands to rebuild what had been erased. Every shard of pottery, every fragment of a temple wall, every whispered song passed down through generations became a piece of the puzzle. And slowly, a picture emerged, one that revealed Zinj not merely as a lost city, but as a cradle of human creativity and trade. Zinj's influence stretched farther than many had ever imagined. Long before modern maps existed, its merchants sailed across the Indian Ocean, exchanging gold, ivory, and art with Arabia, India, and even distant China. Their ships carried not only goods but knowledge, astronomy, agriculture, and architecture, shaping the very foundations of civilization across the seas. The mathematics of Zinj's astronomers helped farmers align planting seasons with the stars. Its builders mastered coral stone architecture that resisted the ocean's salt and storms. Its artists blended African spirit with foreign influence, creating a style both earthly and divine. Even today, echoes of their craftsmanship remain in the intricate carvings of Swahili towns, in the rhythm of drums along the coast, and in the spirit of unity among people separated by distance but bound by culture. Modern historians began to realize something profound. Zinj was never truly gone. It had simply transformed. Its essence lived on in language, trade routes, and the way people told stories. Swahili, for instance, emerged as a fusion of local tongues and foreign words, a living descendant of Zinj as open-hearted cosmopolitanism. Across Africa and beyond, Zinj became a symbol of pride. It reminded the world that African civilizations had always been connected to global progress, not isolated from it. It stood as proof that Africa was not just the birthplace of humanity, but also the birthplace of innovation, art, and diplomacy. Museums in Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, and beyond began to showcase artifacts believed to be from Zinj, delicate gold ornaments, coral sculptures, and engraved tablets with ancient inscriptions. For visitors, these were just relics, but for the descendants of Zinj, they were keys unlocking a forgotten heritage. Artists and writers drew inspiration from the city's legend. Painters imagined its glowing streets under the golden sun, while poets wrote verses about its wisdom and fall. Filmmakers recreated its grandeur, and musicians composed songs that blended modern beats with ancient melodies. The story of Zinj, once hidden beneath centuries of silence, had become a voice for cultural rebirth. Yet, beyond pride, Zinj's legacy carried a deeper message. It spoke of balance, between wealth and wisdom, between progress and preservation. The fall of Zinj was not just the result of external invasion or natural disaster, but of forgetting the delicate harmony between human ambition and the world that sustains it. This lesson resonated strongly in the modern age. As cities across Africa grew into megacities of glass and steel, the echo of Zinj reminded leaders that true greatness lies not in gold or monuments, but in harmony, justice, and respect for the earth. Even in global history, Zinj began to influence the narrative. Scholars compared it to other great ancient centers, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. For too long, Africa's story had been told as a footnote. Now, Zinj demanded its rightful place as a chapter of equal grandeur. The rediscovery also inspired collaboration beyond borders. African historians worked with researchers from Asia and the Middle East to trace the ancient trade routes once used by Zinj merchants. Archaeological digs revealed new evidence of cultural exchange. Chinese porcelain in African ruins, Arabian coins found deep inland. These discoveries reshaped how the world understood connectivity before the modern era. To many, Zinj became more than history. It became hope. It symbolized what humanity could achieve when knowledge was shared, when cultures met not in conflict but in cooperation. And so, the lost civilization transformed into a living philosophy. Universities taught courses titled The Wisdom of Zinj. Leaders quoted its proverbs. Artists used its imagery to celebrate unity across diversity. What had once been ruins became a mirror reflecting the potential of the future. For the descendants of Zinj, scattered across coasts and continents, the story was both a source of pride and a reminder of duty. Pride, for the greatness that once was. Duty, to ensure it would never be forgotten again. The city of gold may have vanished from the earth, but it had been reborn in spirit, as a beacon of what humanity can be when it remembers where it came from. Zinj was not merely an ancient civilization. It was a promise that knowledge, art, and unity will always outlive the empires that rise and fall. And as the sun set over the modern cities that now stand where the kingdom once ruled it, cast a golden glow upon the sea, as if Zinj itself were smiling, watching its children carry its light into a new age. In the dawn light, as the African horizon glows gold once more, a story long buried begins to rise again. The story of Zinj, the city of gold, no longer belongs to myth. It belongs to the living, It breathes in the hearts of those who remember, and in the dreams of those who look to the future. Centuries after its fall, Zinj's spirit has become more than a memory. It is a movement, a call to rediscover what was lost and to build a future worthy of its legacy. Across the continent, young archaeologists brush away the dust of time with reverence, revealing coral walls, ancient tools, and the remains of a civilization that once connected the world. Each discovery is like a heartbeat from the past, whispering, "We were here. We mattered." Modern Africa is no longer the same land Zinj once ruled. Towering cities rise where forests stood, highways stretch across deserts, and satellites orbit above skies once watched only by starlight. Yet, within this progress, the echoes of the old wisdom return, a reminder that technology without soul is as empty as gold without purpose. In classrooms from Nairobi to Cape Town, students learn about Zinj not as a myth, but as history, a story of resilience, trade, and ingenuity. They study how its people mapped the stars, built ports that defied the ocean's fury, and welcomed travelers from distant worlds. The lessons of Zinj are no longer buried beneath colonial narratives. They shine proudly in the story of humankind. The descendants of Zinj, scattered across nations, feel its pulse in their art, their language, their rhythm. The Swahili tongue, born of connection and exchange, carries the melody of Zinj's openness. The carved woodwork of Lamu, the coral houses of Zanzibar, and the shimmering fabrics of Mombasa all speak the same truth. That culture never dies. It simply transforms. In recent years, global explorers and African scholars have joined forces to uncover what remains of the lost capital. Beneath dense jungles and coastal sands, they find traces of roads aligned with the sun, carvings of lions and suns, symbols of Zinj's royal lineage, and intricate gold ornaments that match no known culture. Every artifact tells a fragment of a story that refuses to vanish. Yet, the true treasure of Zinj is not its gold or monuments, but its wisdom. It teaches that power lies not in domination, but in harmony, between humans and nature, between progress and preservation, between memory and renewal. The new generation has begun to carry that torch. Artists craft films and songs inspired by Zinj, telling stories that unite the ancient and the modern. Architects draw from coral stone designs to create sustainable cities. Environmentalists invoke Zinj's old respect for the earth as a guide for the future. And somewhere in the heart of Africa, an idea grows: the Zinj Initiative, a movement to restore the continent's ancient knowledge systems and merge them with modern innovation. Its goal is not to recreate the past, but to learn from it. For Zinj's greatest lesson was never about gold, but about balance, the ability to thrive without forgetting where one comes from. Around the world, the rediscovery of Zinj has also begun to reshape how humanity understands itself. The myth of a dark continent has crumbled under the light of truth. Scholars now speak of Africa not as a backdrop to history, but as one of its architects. The City of Gold stands once more, not in stone, but in the collective consciousness of humankind. There is poetry in this return. Where once Zinj's towers reflected the morning sun, now the skyscrapers of modern Africa gleam with that same golden light. Where its people once traded across the seas, today African innovators trade in ideas, art, and technology. The cycle has turned. The sun has returned. As evening falls, an elder in a coastal village gathers children beneath a baobab tree. Her voice carries softly over the waves. Once, she says, there was a city that shone brighter than the dawn. Its people built with wisdom, traded with honor, and lived in harmony with the world. When pride grew too heavy, the city sank into silence, but its spirit did not die. It traveled through time, waiting for you. The children listen wide-eyed as stars begin to bloom in the sky, the same constellations the astronomers of Zinj once studied. And in that moment, the past and future touch. And For Zinj is no longer just history. It is a compass, pointing humanity toward a world where knowledge, unity, and reverence for life guide the way forward. As the elder finishes her tale, the waves shimmer under the moonlight, and somewhere far below the sea, perhaps, the stones of the old city still rest. Not in ruin, but in peace. And above them, the people of a new world look to the horizon and see what their ancestors once saw: the golden sun rising once more, the promise of Zinj fulfilled.